Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl. Welcome to our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting Series.
Here are the 10 nominees for Best Motion Picture of the Year.
Honora.
The Brutalist.
A Complete Unknown.
Conclave.
Dune, Part 2.
Amelia Perez.
I'm Still Here.
Nickel Boys.
The Substance.
And Wicked.
And on today's episode, we'll be discussing The Brutalist, which racked up 10 Academy Award nominations. And we are joined by a very special guest and friend of the channel. You know him, you love him, Arnaud.
This is going to be the most monumental video in this series. That's a word we've heard thrown around a lot this year, almost as much as the mundanity of evil last year. Monumental is the word that everyone has been using to describe The Brutalist ever since it premiered in Venice. And of course, we've got our guest Arnaud here. And
hello.
Dylan, Arnaud, what do you guys think about The Brutalist? Is it as monumental as they say?
It's monumental for an independent film. And of the 10 films nominated here, if you consider an independent film to be, a film made outside of the studio system, it is technically the only independent film nominated. And it's crazy to have it have this scale and this scope. So yeah, absolutely. It's monumental, not just in what it depicts, but in its creation, I would say.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines. I've had such a weird trajectory with The Brutalist so far. I just watched it for a third time most recently, and I've had some ups, I've had some downs, and people who are fans of the channel or in our Discord server kind of know me as the Brutalist hater, and I kind of feel like Matt last year with Oppenheimer, where I'm still giving this film a very solid grade. It's just a lot lower than the unanimous 10 out of 10s that you see out there online. But yeah, Brutalist, first time I saw it, 35mm. Second time, Dolby. This time around, a screener in my bedroom. Definitely not the most optimal viewing experience, but I've had the same thoughts like every time I've watched this movie. The first 15 minutes are so masterful, so monumental, if you want to use that big word, because it's just an achievement. It feels grand, it feels immersive, and it's so inspiring. And like, how do you even come up with this type of a vision on such a low budget? And the way that Corbet pulls this off is super well done. I'll have a lot more thoughts the further that we get inside the video, but I don't want to ramble too much.
I think it's so refreshing to see. Arnaud, you're talking about the fact that this is the one true independent film, because even Nickel Boys, that was produced by Amazon MGM, and as well as Plan B, Brad Pitt's company. The fact is, The Brutalist is the one film that was made completely without the support of any of the powers that be. Even A24 Neon looked at this film early on and said, no one's going to want to see a 3.5 hour movie about an architect. But it's so refreshing to see an independent film with this much ambition. And I think that's the reason why this is a movie that's standing out so much in the current landscape. We don't often see movies like this anymore. This is an incredibly risk-averse industry. I think back to Cord Jefferson's speech from last year's Oscars, where he was talking about, instead of making one $200 million movie, you could make 10, $20 million movies, but no one's going to do that. And for The Brutalist, you could make 20 The Brutalists for the cost of like one Captain America Brave New World. And that's just crazy. It's crazy that we're not doing more of that. But this is such a risk-averse industry, and it's refreshing to see a movie that aims to be on the same scope as something like Coppola's 70s output of The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, The Conversation. It's a movie. The Brutalist is a movie about building things that'll last forever, and it has the ambition to be a film that'll last forever.
Yeah, it's very encouraging to see that in the Best Picture lineup for sure. The slight, more pessimistic look at that is that if you are an independent filmmaker and an independent film, in order to get into the Best Picture lineup, you have to make something that can be sold or marketed or is made to look like you're part of the club or you're part of that scope or whatever. You can't make a film with this amount of money that isn't a kind of a big American epic or something of that sort. And I know that this is only Brady Corbet's third film, but it's not my favorite of his films. And, having seen all of his other films, I don't necessarily, other than the scope of the film and the ambition and the kind of like quote unquote marketing possibility of the film, there isn't like inherently that much different from this film than the others. And it just kind of proves to me that like there's always gonna be a little bit of a bias in like seeking people's attention that ultimately gets you the kind of acclaim or the kind of awards attention. And these things are unpredictable, and I'm aware that this one had much more overwhelmingly positive reviews than his other works, but I'm still a little bewildered, somewhat bewildered as to how this was unanimously approved, but not his other films. But
Really?
that's
You're
something.
struggling to understand why an American epic in the vein of The Godfather about an architect who's also a Holocaust survivor was more unanimously agreed upon than a movie about a school shooting survivor who ends up becoming a pop star who is basically Sia, has songs written by Sia. I feel like there's a pretty easy thing to see there as to like
But
why
that's what I
one
mean. That's
was.
what I mean. On its pitch, you're going to go more towards the Brutalist, whereas in its contents, they're very similar films. And The Childhood of a Leader, I would say, is even more similar to the Brutalist. It's insane how many similarities in its themes and it's the way it explores its themes you have from that film to this one.
Well, as someone who hasn't seen any other Brady Corbet films, the thing about The Brutalist that really hooked me upon my first watch was all the technical craftsmanship that went into this film. I mean, it's a film about production design. The ways they went about recreating New York and Philadelphia with location scouting really stood out to me. The cinematography, I know my visuals here look awful because I'm in a hotel room, but this film, it goes above and beyond with its limited budget because it does some stuff that's so minimal, like that opening tracking shot on the train. It's so brilliant, even though all it is rigging a camera to the front of a bus, but it's so addicting. And then for as much as I do have some faults with these, but the editing and the screenplay have this addicting rhythm to them, as if we're on that very same train, just barreling ahead of the plot, spanning so many years and so many topics. And it all works so well, at least for me, up until that intermission. And we'll talk more about this later, but once we hit the intermission, I feel like the momentum kind of slows down and the film really never hits the same pace for me. And well, the first half is so meticulously crafted with its narrative beats that's packed in with so much substance. The second half loses a lot of that nuance and kind of starts to hit you over the head with a lot of its themes, which for sometimes it can work and others don't work as much for me. But Brutalist is a film that I really, really, really like, but I am at a little bit of a distance, which seems like a lot of people were with his previous works that seem a little bit more open to it this time around.
I know we're going to disagree on that second part, Dylan, because I think Arnaud and I are quite in alignment that the second part is pretty as phenomenal, at least as the first half. But before we get into that, I just want to say, can we bring back intermissions? Like this is one of my favorite movie moments this year is the intermission of this movie. Not just because of the novelty of it, but it really provides a moment to sit with what you've just seen, to turn to the people that you're with and talk about what has happened so far. It's really a way that I have felt it brings cinema back to community. Because so often when you go to a movie with friends, you talk to them before the movie and then you sit in darkness and then the movie ends and then you talk to them again. But having that intermission is a really great way to bring community back into cinema, to allow you to engage with your neighbors, your friends, and talk about, engage with the film. So I think that's really special and something that I didn't anticipate from the intermission.
The moment where the intermission happens is invigorating as well because you're on a high right now, and
Mhm.
and I mean, like anybody knows that like if you're on that much of a high, you're about to crash down in some ways. And I guess something I want to quickly mention is that again I've rewatched The Brutalist not long ago. I watched Childhood of a Leader for in preparation for this video. I've watched Vox Lux twice. So something I'm really noticing in Brady Corbet, there's a lot of things kind of linking these works together, but I think that Brady Corbet is really starting to make himself known as the filmmaker of dichotomies. He loves to split things in two and let you kind of ponder the difference between these two things, whether that's the childhood and adulthood in the childhood of a leader, whether that's minimalism versus maximalism in Vox Lux, or whether that's the optimism of immigration and the frank reality of capitalism in the second half.
So talking about the nomination for Best Director, I think it's a great way to move into that because yes, Brady Corbet is taking bold swings. He is unafraid to do things that other directors might shy away from or might say, maybe I want to go a little bit more subtle than that. But he knows that he's making big swings. He knows that if he's making a movie, he wants it to stand the test of time. One quote that I remember reading from Brady Corbet is asking if he'd ever make a sci-fi film. And he was saying, there's only two great sci-fi movies, 2001 and Solaris. And if I can't make one better than those two movies, I don't want to make one. And I think that kind of goes back to Brady Corbet as a filmmaker. He is not interested in going halfway. He's not interested in not doing the thing all the way to its full potential. And so here, every single moment in this movie is because he wants it to be as big, as bold as possible. He's taking a lot of inspiration, not only from those 70s new Hollywood movies, but also from 50s melodramas. He's drawing a lot from Cirque. He's drawing a lot from even outside of the Hollywood system, from Antonioni, from Bergman. I mean, there's a great visual reference to the Seventh Seal as those characters walk up the hill. There's so many the pieces that he's drawing from are films that so many other filmmakers would be terrified to be referencing or terrified to be using as a counterpoint. But the whole thing with Corbet is he wants to be as good as those filmmakers. He wants to be mentioned in the same sentence as Antonioni, as Bergman, as Fellini. He wants to be one of the greats. And I think that is his biggest asset. It's almost the delusion that makes him so great.
If monumental is the word to describe the Brutalist at large, ambition, I would say, is the word to describe Brady Corbet's nomination and director, because I have so many thoughts about his direction of this film from top to bottom. A lot of them work in tandem with the screenplay, so I'll save some of those for later. But, I mean, Corbet, you have to give your hats off to him. This guy knows exactly what he wants, and he doesn't really get anything get in his way. I mean, we talked about before, $10 million budget. So many directors would just say, no, I can't work with this. My vision is going to have to wait till later. It's going to be a passion project for 20, 30 years until I get the budget that I think I deserve for this project. But he went ahead with it and made the film that he wanted to the core. He screened at the film companies and were like, it needs to be like this. And they all said no. He said, I need an intermission. They said no. He says, I want it to screen in 70 millimeter nationwide. Company said no. So what did he do? He made it himself. He sent it to a festival. It got immense acclaim mainly for his direction inside of the film. And then what happened? So many studios came crawling back and says, okay, we'll give you your wide release in 1,000+ theaters for multiple weeks for this 3.5-hour drama. Like putting away all your thoughts on the film itself. That's a true feat right there, to be able to stick to your word, deliver higher than what anyone's expecting, and to just really pull one on the studios. Like, hats off there.
Corbet, at this point in time, Childhood of a Leader was fairly well received, not as much by audiences, and then Vox Lux was like very mixed, both on the critical and the audience side. And so with that track record and with the pitch of, a 3.5-hour film with an intermission, I think, the studios, even if they love the script, even if A24, Neon, whoever else kind of looked at the pitch here, even if they love the script, they think this film is impossible to market if it's not good or if it's divisive, even if it's divisive, even if it's just solid. Because for that pitch to work, it needs to be exceptional. To get people to get into the theater, it needs to be amazing. And then once it did have unanimously positive reviews at Venice, that's when, you know, the demands start to flood in, because suddenly they're like, oh, okay, this is actually well received, and therefore, you know, then there's immediately an angle to it, which is like, if you're, you know, the Martin Scorsese's of like you know, cinema, and you want to support cinema and great cinema, like this is cinema, there's a market for that, and there's a market that can recoup the budget for sure. What you were saying, Matt, about, you know, Corbet's references, I think back a little bit to, and how that influences the way he wants to make movies, and his way of directing. That reminds me, because I've been watching countless Corbet interviews in the background. That reminds me of at some point he said something along the lines of, when I see a sports game, a basketball game, you know, I want to see the athlete push themselves to their limit. I want to see them suffer to a certain extent. And he kind of puts that onto himself. He thinks that for the work to be great, the artist really needs to push themselves and to suffer. And he's even been on record saying working on The Brutalist has probably shaved off a few years of his life expectancy. So kind of an intense guy here.
On a writing standpoint, something I want to mention and something I really appreciate with this film is, so often in movies as grand and as epic as this, it's hard to feel time passing. I think back to seeing 12 Years a Slave for the first time, and the thing that I kept thinking was, there's no way that 12 years passed over the course of this movie. You cannot feel time whatsoever. Something I love about The Brutalist is that this takes place over the period of like 16 years or so. And it does feel throughout like that time is passing. You can feel how long every single part of Laszlo's process takes. And I think that is such an achievement, not just as a director, but as a writer, to be able to cover slivers and moments on this massive journey. Also, I think there's such layers on a thematic level to this film. We could talk for hours about the anti-imperialist messages of this. We could talk about the themes of art under capitalism. There's so many different angles to this. It's a film that's built to be interpreted in many, many different ways. It's almost like there's no real correct way of viewing this film. There's definitely incorrect ways of viewing it, but I think that's baked in. Corbet's made a film that he wants people to discuss. He doesn't want to give you the answers. He just wants to leave you with the questions. And it takes a writer with a lot of restraint to be able to make a 3.5 hour long movie that still leaves so much on the table.
Yeah, it's very dense. And like, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen this film twice now, and I feel like on the end of my second watch, I was like, okay, I feel like I really saw this film for the first time.
Actually, for me, I felt like I got it less on a second viewing.
Oh,
like
okay.
The first time, I felt like so much was crystal clear. The second time, by the end, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, I want to give a little bit more space for just talking about the script in general before I go to the ending. But at the ending, I was like, I thought I understood that the first time. I have no idea now.
You know, what will make you love or hate this film is whether or not you're interested, or you find what the film or how the film talks about these themes pertinent. And again, like I was talking about dichotomy just a second ago, but the fact that, you know, essentially the first part of the film is a bit of a setup to what ultimately is the second half. You know, if fundamentally, if you don't like where the second half is going, it's unfortunate, because that's what the film was the whole time. You know, this film is a lot of things, but it is an immigration story. And Corbet talked about this as well, but it's something you notice at the end, is that it's maybe one of the only major American immigration stories where by the end you're not in America. And I don't mean the very last scene, the epilogue. I mean, literally, the characters talk to each other and say, let's get out of here. And, you know, I don't think that is meant to be read purely positively. I think, at the very start of the film, you have in Erzsébet's letter, she thinks back to Goethe's quote about like nobody is more enslaved than those who believe themselves to be free. I think the characters are aware of that, and they know that even moving to another place, they're still not going to be completely free. But the fact that, they were expecting to a certain extent this freedom moving from one place to another, and they still could not receive it. And now they're moving again by the end of the film. I really like that narrative through line. You start with that at the beginning, and by the end, not only are they out of the country, you don't see them leave, but you hear them talk about leaving, about deciding to leave. And of course, at the very end, it's not about the journey, it's about the destination.
I really like what both y'all just had to say there about the script. I think what Matt said about the showcasing of the passages of time is one of the script's highlights here. Even regardless of the film's 3.5-hour runtime, you do feel the years pass, especially when you're in the first half of the film and it has this such fast and intense pace, and then when you flip to the second half, while the pace may be a little bit slower, you can still feel the passage of time and the monotony of this project that Laszlo just can't really create. And then to your point, Arnaud, I really, even as someone who doesn't like where the second half goes to, has to agree that this was Corbet's decision and his creative direction through and through. That's where he wanted to end. And I guess this goes back to my point over in direction, is there's so much to love here, at least for me. But some of the biggest positives are also the biggest negatives. While I love how bold and unique the opening half and even 3/4, I go as far to say everything up until about that last 40 minutes of when they go off to Italy is such streamlined, and it feels so singular and so unique. And maybe it is by design, but once there is a certain act that happens until the conclusion of the film, it feels like Corbet's pulling from so many different directions that don't feel in sync with everything that we've seen before. Granted, that could be what the story's trying to go for, but as a viewer, it didn't really connect with me as much, because I love this creative choice that they use early on with Felicity Jones' character to make her kind of like a MacGuffin. It's what we're working towards, it's what we want to see, and her voiceovers really helps move the plot forward. But when she comes into the story, I feel like we lose kind of that spark, we lose that energy, and it's all playing into really this topic of the American dream, who's this really for, and how it's an illusion for so many people. And like you say, Arnaud, at the very end of the film, they're like, no, it's not for us. Let's go out. We can have a better life elsewhere. It's just really the way that Corbet's direction just doesn't feel as in unison with everything that we've seen before is what really took me astray.
You talk about direction and about how what you were saying about the second half not feeling as energetic when Felicity Jones comes into the picture. It kind of reminded me, like, you see quite a lot of scenes in the first half where Adrien Brody is really at work, physically on the field, whether that's measuring the distances on the hill, whether that's working on the reading room, and even if we haven't really started the foundation of the big project, you see the maquette, you see a lot of those things, and in the second half, you're oftentimes on the location of the construction, but like you don't feel the project being built, and it's crazy how just by not showing these things, there's inherently a feeling that seeps into you, in that like you don't feel the kind of like push and the motivation, the energy that often drives these kind of creative acts. And it's crazy how, like, once the building is complete, once the community center is complete, you barely realize it is, until you're at some moment, during another scene, you're like, oh, I guess it was finished. Like it's crazy how these little decisions on what to show and how much to show them. Like it's these kinds of decisions I really appreciate in the film. But it just reminded me of that.
Yes. All of them? Yes. I'm sorry. Have I upset you? No.
So yeah, moving out of the original screenplay, The Brutalist, it racked up 3 acting awards, and why don't we start off with Best Lead Actor? Because Adrien Brody, this guy, he's one of my favorite working actors for a reason, because whether he's playing a small character actor type role or being handed over an epic film like The Brutalist, he always is giving his all. He fully immerses himself into the characters, making them feel like they're a living, breathing entity, and like they're a real person. There's times where the first watch I had of The Brutalist, I'm like, Laszlo Toth, that's a real guy. Like, did he sound like this? Did he look like this? Did Brody nail the mannerisms? I Googled him, like, no, this is just a fully original creation. And like, we've talked a lot in this Best Picture Revisiting series about nonverbal acting, of how actors are acting with their eyes or their body language or their mannerisms, which Adrien Brody is doing the complete opposite of that, because he is loud. He's giving a full-on acting performance, and it's all the much more fantastic for it. He gets to yell, he gets to cry, he lashes out, and he gets to be personable. We get to see all of these ranges of emotions throughout the whole film. It's not like, oh, in Act 1 he's like this, in Act 2 he's like that. No, we see the natural progression and the early seeds for some of the later blow-ups and explosions of this character. Because right from the start, we see this range of emotions with Laszlo. He's distraught when he wakes up at the bottom of the ship. He's happy when he walks upstairs in that long, fantastic tracking shot to see the Statue of Liberty. He's elastic. But then when he gets on the bus, he sees his cousin. He learns that his wife is still alive. He's so happy. He's bursting down in tears because of this immense emotion. That's just not stuff you can fake. That is real acting right there, because Adrien Brody is fantastic inside The Brutalist. He carries the weight of this character's world and all the struggles and hardships that he's been throughout his entire life on his shoulders. And it's so deep and it's so authentic. And over the course of 3.5 hours, Brody is given countless opportunities to showcase what a remarkable talent he is. And while, yeah, I would probably like to see Timothée Chalamet win Best Lead Actor, because he hasn't won one before, and he's doing a great job inside of A Complete Unknown. But if I had a ballot, I'd probably be voting for Adrien Brody.
I'd like to just very quickly touch on the AI controversy very quickly,
Oh,
because it's not even worth talking about. People have been trying to invalidate Adrien Brody and Felicity Jones' work in this film by saying, "Oh, they used AI to fake their performance." No, no, they used AI to slightly tweak certain Hungarian vowels, which are very hard for English speakers to speak. Basically, what they did is no worse than what a musician does when they use auto tune. It is the smallest, tiniest tweak, and like people are blowing it so out of proportion.
yeah, I'll just say that like a lot of like the tech company that was used for the plugin to fix these Hungarian vowels, they praise themselves as an AI company, but inherently it's an algorithm, the same way that Grammarly, like through an algorithm, corrects or gives you ideas of how to correct your sentence. Like if we really broaden the definition of AI, algorithms can take a place in that. But as speaking as an editor, this is common practice, and it's not like in a cynical way to limit our workload or something like that. It's just something that, especially as an independent film, it's a really good. They're really good tools and good resources. That's the bad thing about this controversy, is that is that we don't actually wind up talking about the film itself. Brody, yeah, he's like 10 out of 10, like A plus, and it's like I usually hate or am allergic to overacting, and on paper you could say he does everything right. He cries, he yells, he does a little bit of everything. But it's never unwarranted. It's never unreasonable. It feels just the right level. You think of, one of my favorite scenes of the film is the first scene of the second half of the film, where he's at the train station and seeing Elizabeth, and you don't see him like, oh my God, I see her. Oh, there she is. Oh my gosh. No, it's just a little hand wave. Sophia, Sophia. And when he sees his wife and he starts to realize that she has osteoporosis, um, without his knowledge, he never, throughout the entire scene, he kind of like brings her face to him, but they never kiss. And it's just this kind of like he's a little bit in shock, and he doesn't really know how to take this, and he's content, but he's not completely but he feels but he's mixed with all these emotions that somehow prevent him from going into full affection. And it's these kinds of brilliant choices that I think makes his performance incredibly memorable.
It's fantastic work. I think it's a career best, more than The Pianist for sure, in my opinion. I think it's really impressive to see someone over the course of, again, 16 years slowly losing their values, getting to watch an artist who begins to work in a system that prioritizes growth over all else. And we see this throughout, this sort of battling within the system that sort of degrades him more and more and more. I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the first time when he sits across the table from Harrison's character, and he's disheveled and broken and covered in coal dust, and he just slightly starts to tear up upon seeing his old buildings, seeing that copies of the photos of these buildings still exist. Not that the buildings still exist, it's that photos of the buildings still exist. But there's something so powerful in that scene, seeing someone who has been so broken over the past couple of years by trying to work in this system. I think it's such a powerful moment, and I think it's emblematic of his entire performance, because really the whole thing, even when he gets back up on his feet, is still a constant spiral downwards as he loses more and more of his values. Even as he gets to work on this massive project, we do see him as an artist constantly eroding.
So moving into our next acting category, let's go to Best Supporting Actor. Guy Pearce, he's gotten so much praise for this performance, and he's so fun to watch. He's engaging, he's charismatic, he's got so many great one-liners throughout this film. I just wish there was a little bit more to his character, but I mean, it's the definition of a true supporting performance. He's uplifting the lead. He's fun, has memorable sequences. I just, like I said, I just wish there was a little bit more to him, and I get the emotional payoff of him just walking out of that final scene, but I would enjoy to see at least one more sequence with Guy Pearce, but he's really good inside this film.
That's the thing, you don't get a payoff, right? Like I don't know about you guys, but I think it's the same for all of us. You don't realize you've seen him for the last time until you're like, oh, he's just not coming back, you know? And it's the same for Brody, and it's kind of the same for Elizabeth, actually. It's crazy how our main trio here, you don't realize you've seen him for the last time until it's too late. And I think that's what makes the climax pretty, whether you like what is actually happening or not, what makes it powerful is that you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Like there's something almost ghostly about what happens here. But I think, that's fair what you say about his character. I think he is a really, really, really well thought out and well conceived character, and I think it's you don't see much of these kinds of like patron to artist kind of characters in films, and I think that Corbet gives him a lot of complexity and a fair shot at like to understand him. And to me, I think what I get out of Guy Pearce's character is that, it's a character who realizes that there is kind of a capital and a social capital merit to artistry. And even if he could not understand it for the life of him, he wants to possess it as in a certain fashion.
I think you're saying something really interesting here, because it is largely a film about how capitalists treat art as yet another thing to be conquered, yet another conquest. If we're talking about this film as a larger metaphor for imperialist countries, imperialist nations, and fascist nations, we could see its view of art and the way that Harrison tries to dominate art as saying that capitalists and fascists will try to take part in this because they understand it gives them that social capital, and because it's yet another thing to conquer. It's yet another conquest that they can expand their domain with. Not only is he a great businessman, but he's a patron of the arts. And he's not doing that because he loves the arts. He's doing that because it is new territory for him to conquer. And something that I love about his performance goes back to a line in Parasite, which is, of course, they're nice. They're rich. They can afford to be nice. I think a lot of his performance, he is this totally unhinged goofball who is so over the top and eccentric, but of course he's eccentric. He can afford to be eccentric. He has the money, he has the social capital. People will respect him no matter how he presents himself because he can afford to be weird. He can afford to be strange. He can afford to go out on a limb and support a random stranger's artistic practice because he has the money to do so.
That's my favorite part about this Best Picture Revisiting series is being positive. That's what we're doing. We're admiring, we're celebrating these nominees because Felicity Jones doesn't really work for me much in this film. So I'm glad that we have someone here. I'm sure Matt will talk more about it, about why she is deserving of this nomination. Like I said before in this episode, I think she works best as this driving force to help Laszlo and the plot move forward throughout the first half. The ultimate resolution is where it kind of loses me a little bit, but I get that is the story's direction that comes more from me as a viewer, more so than the craft work of the film itself. But I think her voiceover work in the first half really works because it makes you engage, it makes you care, and that you can feel the love between these two people, and you understand why Laszlo is working his ass off, putting himself through so many rigorous things to bring them together once again. And I like your point earlier. This was in a few sections ago, Arnaud, where you talked about that scene where they reconnect, and you can see a little bit how he is happy to see her, but he also is like, this isn't who I last knew. With that interpretation, upon another rewatch, maybe I can become a little bit more open to this performance and how their connection goes. Because my biggest thing upon all three watches of The Brutalist is just, I don't feel the love between these two characters. I don't feel like there is anything left between them. And maybe that is the result of being away from someone for so long, or them coming back completely different than how you knew them before. But I appreciate having that input here.
But I think that's sort of the point of their relationship after all of this time. I don't think it's time that destroyed them as much as the horrors that they endured. And it's not that it destroyed them, but it destroyed any romanticism, any fantasy of what a love story looks like. These two are clearly in love, but it's much more of a partnership than it is that traditional head over heels love story. They are there for each other. They are going to support each other to the ends of the earth. They are going to stay with one another to the ends of the earth. And yet something so traumatic has happened through their lives that it's impossible for them to connect on that fantasy level of what love is often portrayed as in cinema. What I really like in Felicity Jones' performance is that she brings in this sort of intensity that counters Laszlo's oftentimes fanciful view of his place in this dynamic, in this sort of capitalist dynamic between him and his patron. She's often the one to bring him back down to earth. She's often the one to question his choices, like giving away his paycheck to be able to afford a little bit more concrete. She's often the one to remind him that he is not family to Harrison, that he is not going to be looked after by these people. She is the one that keeps him grounded when so often he will convince himself that he's more than just a worker, that he's more than just disposable to them. And I love that part of her performance. She's brash. She is unafraid to speak her mind, which is why we get that final confrontation. She is not interested in participating in any social contracts. And we see that through the film. She's often impolite or brash to people. But that's just who she is. She's not willing to be an innocent victim or a bystander of this system. She will fight.
Yeah, in the car ride at the that's the second scene we see her in with Guy Pearce's character, with Harrison Van Buren. even though she takes his offer of, oh, thanks for giving me this interview at this newspaper in New York, etc. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think she looks at him ever. She just looks out
No,
the window the entire time. So
she
there's
looks out
always
the
a little bit
window.
of like, I'm gonna take my distances from you. I'm gonna try to benefit from you somewhat, or at least like try to like give you the benefit of the doubt. But I don't know about you. You don't seem too trustworthy to me.
Well, perhaps you can help your husband sound less like he shines shoes for a wage.
Haven't you told them anything about me?
Laszlo, how long have you been here now? 4, 5 years? You have no excuse anymore. I'm sorry, I got a little carried away there. Will you please pass that back?
So over on the cinematography end, this is obviously some of the most stunning work of the year. There are so many shots in this that could be the single best image in a film this year. To me, I think the moment that just keeps coming back and replaying in my head is that slow motion shot of the train in the distance. I don't even think it's slow motion. It just looks slow because we're so far away from the train. And as
That's so
the steam comes up from the train and engulfs in fire, that is, I think, one of the greatest cinematic images that we have this year, hands down.
For the cinematographer at large, I mean, it's shot in VistaVision, 35, 70 millimeter, whatever they actually did. It's a blast from the past. It looks great. I think my favorite moments are a lot of the wider shots where, like, we see the time lapse of them building the building, or when we're out in Italy just looking at the rocks and everything. I don't know. It's one of those films that I think it's very, like, odd to like point to a specific moment and be like, yeah, this is the highlight, because it all looks so well because it's working in tandem throughout.
Lots of incredible oneers throughout the entire thing. Like Corbet has kind of spoken out about, like, in order to make this film as low budget as it is and as doable in a short time frame, shooting this in 33 days, the only way to do that was to minimize coverage. Coverage being the number of shots you shoot per scene. And that's because, if you add another shot to shoot, that's another kind of like, you got to change the lighting setups and a lot of these kinds of things. And here, there's so many scenes that, like, I think of the scene in the second half where he's showing kind of the plans to all the other all the people who have to have a say or have to advise on budget cuts and whatnot. And that entire scene is 2 shots. It's one shot, and then like around the beginning we have a bit of a aerial shot in order to kind of show where they are located within this underground build, but the rest of it is just a oneer. And being able to pull off that kind of shot and the incredible line of, like, everything that is everything that is what is it everything that is ugly, cruel, stupid, but mostly ugly, everything is your fault. And all of that in like a 2-minute shot is just brilliant.
That's so fascinating to hear that they minimized the coverage with this film, because I feel like that's something that most directors nowadays are terrified of. We see in so many films that it's all about coverage. People are getting 10 to 20 angles of every single little scene. You could cover famously in Taken 3, a shot of Liam Neeson jumping over a fence can be covered in like 12 different shots. And it's because so many filmmakers are afraid of making a choice and having to stick with it in the edit. And with that, I think we can talk about that edit, because something that's so impressive through that use of oneers, through the way that they basically bake the edit into the shooting style, is how quickly this film flies by. The pacing of it just moves and moves and moves. Despite being 3.5 hours, this film feels shorter than, I would say, probably half of the other Best Picture nominees this year. It just breezes by, and it is a miracle that a film like this, with such a distinct and patient visual style, has such a propelling movement through it.
I mean, yeah, the editing is exceptional throughout, and like even if I have some issues with the back half, I'm never not engaged. I'm never not fully committed because it has such a fun energy throughout, and like the highs and the lows of this American dream. And I really like when films edit to the music, and The Brutalist does it a lot. And those are what you would think would be pretty easy to do, but watching some films do it, they just completely ignore it. So I very much like that aspect of this as well. Arnaud talked about the oneers. People don't think oneers involve editing, but they surely do. And the use of them here, whether they were by design or not, is still always fun to see. And yeah, I mean, like Matt said, it's a 3.5-hour movie. It feels so short. It's so engaging. And dare I say, to quote Harrison, it's intellectually stimulating.
There's so much I could talk about the editing for this film. And side note, I just want to say I am so happy to see it nominated, because this was not a guarantee going into nomination morning, right? Like, it had been weirdly missing some spots here and there. Missing the shortlist at BAFTA 2 was really, really disappointing. But it's one of the best edited films of the year, in my opinion. But I'm also thinking, there's the oneers, which are really well utilized, and that still, use cutting with usually only the second kind of shot of coverage that was done for that scene very well. I'm also thinking back to the party, the kind of dinner party scene at the Van Buren estate in towards the end of the first half of the film. And that's like at the dinner table, but also when they're sitting down and talking to each other and talking about their stories. It's really, really fascinating to see how the film was edited to give a sense of place and give a sense of mood, because it doesn't do, other than the very first shot, there is not no establishing shots whatsoever. It's really just focusing on the characters. But at certain key moments, whether it's Toth being distracted by something, or oftentimes it's actually while a cigar or a cigarette is being lit throughout that scene, we have this kind of quick montage of a bunch of things happening with the party, a cup with champagne, a random face, something, etc. And it's kind of these random bursts of montage that just happen kind of like in tandem with the sound design to give a sense of what this place is like, and how quietly suffocating it kind of is.
As well, the steel sequence is, I think, one of my favorite sequences of being edited to the music, because it's so rhythmic, like the pounding of machines. And I think that makes me want to talk about the score, which I think best of the decade score, hands down, might be the best of the last 15 years for me. This is one of my favorite scores. That I was just listening to the album again today. The way that it uses these brass instruments, the way that it uses the rhythm of a train. It's this machinery drive that just pumps us forward, pumps us forward. And I feel like the key to so much of the film comes down to that score, comes down to that machinery sound, that train sound, that industrialist noise that comes out of this. As well, the delicate piano tracks that feel much more like the hand of an artist versus the hand of an industrialist in those brass sequences. This is, bar none, some of my favorite cinematic music work. Probably top 10 scores for me ever. Wow. And I don't say that lightly, because I love movie music. I can talk at length about my favorite movie music. This is some of the best. I'm sorry, Dylan, better than Dune Part 2, better than Challengers. This deserves that Oscar.
Yeah, Dylan, are you going to buy the vinyl for this?
Oh yeah, I've already bought the vinyl, because my love of Challengers on this channel has overshadowed my appreciation for Bloomberg's work inside The Brutalist, and I think it is really remarkable. And like, yeah, I personally prefer Challengers, but of our nominees here, this should win, because it transports you, especially those opening 3 overture tracks. Like, when those play, you're just hooked throughout, and because a large part, there's the visuals on screen, but because of the music itself, is so engaging. It's so fun's a weird word to use, but it is fun, and it's like the perfect score to listen to inside the film as well as outside the film. And like, sure, I could throw some critiques saying, well, it's the main few themes, and then throughout the rest of the score, it's kind of broken down, whether it's just one instrument or just a little bit more this way. But that doesn't mean the score is still not great overall. I think this should win.
It's absolutely an exceptional score. I think it would probably be my second favorite of the year, behind Evil Does Not Exist. But yeah, I can totally see why you would put that in your top 10 of the last 15 years. It's really, really strong work. It's varied work. It's very the very experimental in the way that it uses sound and it blends with sound and the kind of timbre it proposes. The theme for me that always gets me is in the second half when we get introduced to Erzsébet's theme. I don't know what it is about that theme. I almost every time I listen to it, especially the way it's reincorporated in the song Heroine, is makes me want to cry. Like it's so powerful to me. Like especially in tandem with seeing Erzsébet maybe like maybe on the brink of death on the toilet. Like I cannot like that to me is overwhelmingly emotional. And yeah, it's Erzsébet's theme for me is the highlight of that score.
Sir, I do not know what the commission entails.
We'll talk about the details at home, but you'll be well compensated. And also, you'll be given a place here on the property to live and work. I think that residing here will allow you the time and the space to conceive of it properly. And your family, should they arrive, they're welcome here too.
So for production design, something that really stood out to me was when I saw this with my fiance, the first thing that she was saying was, is it meant to be this ugly? Like, is it meant to look this terrible? And I don't know the answer to that because honestly, I think a lot of it is beautiful, but in a very dated way, in a very distinct to that art form, to that sort of movement within architecture. I think the work is undeniably grand and exceptional to make these buildings with a $10 million budget, to build that mansion, to build the pillars of the community center and the community center itself. There's so much incredible work that is happening in creating these spaces. It is interesting, though, that they aren't meant to be visually pleasing. They aren't meant to necessarily be the type of work that you can look at and go, that is the most stunning work of art that I've ever seen. And brutalist architecture does have its fans. It has its fanboys that love it. But a lot of the time, these are the types of buildings that you walk by on the street and you go, oh, oh, who made that? Like, it looks like someone made a jail there. But I do think that the work is so undeniably impressive and it captures this movement so well, regardless of whether you like that style on a personal level or not.
And then as Matt just talked about in production design, like, sure, I guess you can call it a little bit of ugly, but like the true feat here of the Brutalist production design is the crew's location scouting to find real life buildings that already exist in the world and making them correlate to these ideals that we know about Laszlo Toth. And like, I think when you have a film that is essentially about production design, like, of course this is going to get nominated, but it's not just because it's about production design. I still think it's pretty great work all in all.
I'll do a slight counterpoint to the production design. I think that considering the resources they had, this is fantastic. Like, it's crazy what they were able to do and how they were able to utilize it within the story. Like the entire second half of the film is about building the community center, and you see it very sparsely, and you see only like hints or little angles, even at the very end where there's like this kind of haunted mansion thing going on where you don't know who's who and what room you're in necessarily, and you're just kind of going through this building. It's very impressionistic. You only get kind of like certain angles, certain hints of things. You never get a full view of what it is. You never get a sense of the space, really, all other than perhaps the altar. But the only kind of pet peeve I have about the production design is that, to me, it very much feels like they just shot in very European looking locations that were furbished with American looking props. And that's because they shot in Hungary. But the kind of ugliness of the buildings you were kind of talking about, to me, that's kind of the old kind of like foundations and the kind of decrepit concrete almost, or like kind of rocky surfaces of Central European buildings. Like to me, it does look a lot like those, and it's hard for me. Like you look at Miller and Sons, that building to me, like it's very clearly a European building. Like there's not much American about that, in my opinion. But
yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you just said there. It's like it's what they had to work with, and I think it's very good stuff. Would have been cooler if it was a little bit more grand or spectacle like, sure, but it's what you're dealt. But speaking of what you're dealt, award season, it's gone crazy this last week. We went from a wide open race with like 6-7 films that had a chance to win Best Picture. Now it's looking like the tides are really turning towards Anora. But I guess opening up to y'all, do y'all feel like this still has a shot to win Best Picture?
No, I don't think it can win Best Picture, because something that I keep saying over and over is that for a film to win Best Picture, you have to really appeal to people's hearts. In a film like The Brutalist, although it does have emotional moments, it's a film that overall makes people think far more than it makes them feel. It's a film that leaves so much up in the air, that leaves a lot of question marks, that the last 30 minutes offers us no closure to those characters. And then it cuts into the future, and we have the themes of the film, maybe the themes of the film, maybe not the themes of the film, summed up to us as like a retrospective on someone's career. The way that this film works overall prioritizes thought over feeling. And while that makes for a great and exceptional film, when's the last time that a film like that won Best Picture? Because frankly, I don't think that there has been one since maybe No Country for Old Men.
yeah, I think at this point we're recording a little bit after PGA and DGA were announced. Both went to Anora. Pack it up, boys. Anora wins Best Picture. I still kind of am inclined to say that I still think Corbet can win director. It wouldn't be a wise prediction at this point, but I think it can still happen. He would definitely need to win at BAFTA. Yeah, this isn't winning Best Picture, not just because of what it is, but also just simply, the precursors right now have spoken. It's not powerful enough. I still hope that at the bare minimum, it can win like 2 prizes, maybe. Like, let's give it score, let's give it actor at the very least.
Yeah, and like you said, the journey's been crazy for The Brutalist. When we had these rumblings of it might be going to Venice, but there's no distributor, we're like, well, will it come out in 2024? Will it be 2025? Will it go to someone who doesn't have the right campaign resources? Will it go to a big dog? Then it came out and it seemed prized to win multiple awards. It slipped a little bit, then it came back strong with the Golden Globes. And yeah, now we're at this point, we are recording this before BAFTA. The video will probably go up either the day of the BAFTAs or the day after, so you can kind of know the real field after that. Maybe it surprises, it wins BAFTA, it wins Brody, it wins Corbet, it wins a slew of techs.
For a film that values all of its cast members as much as it does, I am baffled that, well, maybe I shouldn't be baffled, but I'm still in awe at the fact that SAG could not recognize this film in ensemble. As an actor, I would be overjoyed not only to work on this film, but to be in an opening credits with my name put in this way, kind of sliding from right to left. Even for a character as quote unquote small as Audrey, played by Emma Laird, like I would love to be in this kind of an ensemble where the acting is valued and where the dialogue is so rich. Even the line about the tricycle for her, it baffles me that this couldn't get a SAG ensemble nomination.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned 10 nominations. It's kind of hard to really have some say, but like you said, SAG ensemble, and in fact, it missed out 2 of its actors at SAG. Very weird reception to the Brutalist over there, but we don't have a casting category yet, but potentially next year, this would be something that's kind of in the discussion because you are casting such major roles to carry a 3.5-hour runtime of a film in a movie that they clearly loved from top to bottom. But as we mentioned, it's probably not winning Best Picture at the Oscars, but maybe it can win Arnaud's Preferential Ballot. So Arnaud, what is your number 10?
So kind of like last year, actually, there's only one film that I don't think is at all worthy of a nomination. And this year it's Wicked. Wicked is at the bottom of my ballot. Not a good film. The same way that Detective Pikachu, I can love it as a Pokemon fan, but not appreciate it as a cinema fan. I don't understand why this was received as well by the on a cinematic level, even by the Wicked fans. I'm a little baffled by that. Number 9, I would put a very good film, but I would put Conclave, which to me is just kind of a fun film, but not that much more to it. Number 8 would be I'm Still Here. Solid emotional drama. Number 7, I was very surprised by this. I loved it a lot more than I thought I would. Complete Unknown. As someone who was ignorant of Dylan, kind of got me into Bob Dylan, so really appreciate that. Number 6 for me is Amelia Perez. Doesn't always work, but damn does it take swings, and damn does it have some really great scenes. Number 5, sorry Dyl, but Dune has to go here. I soured on this over time, honestly, and I soured on the first part as well, having seen Dune Part 2. So I hope the third one can kind of bring it all back. But this is, I don't know. Some parts of it just didn't come together for me. Number 4 would be Nickel Boys, which really, really ambitious, really great film. Number 3 for me is The Substance. Love the swings it takes there. And then my top 2 here, I know I'm here on the Brutalist episode, so you're expecting me to put Brutalist number 1. But honestly, I've been really, really thinking about this because I love Anora so much. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been flip-flopping over them. But I think I have to put Anora at number 2 and the Brutalist at number 1. But they're very, very close. I would have them tied if I could.
And that seems to be the running theme here, is we've had kind of 3 films really garner a lot of the number 1 mentions: Anora, Substance, Dune. And then we've had a few films kind of collectively be at the bottom every time, of Wicked, Amelia, and A Complete Unknown. So happy to say you're currently the person who has A Complete Unknown the highest so far of all of our guests.
Wow, no, I think people are. I've heard people say that it's just a basic biopic, and it's not that. But you have to recognize there's a lot of like really interesting cinematic ideas within that film that people are not giving it credit for. So
that's a wrap on episode 7 of our 2025 Best Picture Revisiting series. Here's the current combined leaderboard for both our guest and Matt and I's preferential ballot. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where special guests and members of the Filmball server will be joining us to discuss Conclave.